Antifa members and protesters clashed outside a children's drag brunch near Dallas over the weekend. According to the New York Post, masked and armed Antifa members surrounded the event location to block protesters from approaching. The Barrel Babes drag brunch was billed by organizers as where kindness and inclusion meets fabulous fun. Organizers promised no erotic behavior, and the restaurant even passed a no sexual content inspection from the Texas Comptroller's office prior to the event.
Representative Lauren Boebert waded into the fray, tweeting, quote, "A kid-friendly drag show in Texas was guarded by masked Antifa guards armed with AR-15s. Remember, they only want your guns. They want to use theirs to protect their depravity." Despite all of the protesting and commotion outside, owners of the restaurant said the event was a huge success with maximum capacity, no food left, and a win for love.
All right, a lot to unpack here with the Antifa drag brunch.
Robbie? Is there a lot to unpack?
Look, I think a lot of the Republican commentary on this is being fairly dishonest. There was no. I understand the desire to not have children exposed to sexual content, and some of the stripping or sexual dancing that was shown at some of these previous videos of other events. I can understand why people were bothered by it.
Which is why there's a lot of consistent objection to Hooters among this crowd.
I still don't care. What parents, like, I put parents in charge. I'm not going to question other families. I don't approve of it. It's really none of my business. But this event, anyway, was not sexual, did not involve stripping, did not involve sexual dancing. It's just literally men dressed up as women, which did not used to be offensive. Like, our founders wouldn't have found it offensive. They wore wigs.
Shakespeare did it.
Right. In Shakespeare, all the men played the female roles. So there's a little bit of a moral panic about this exact thing. What's interesting is the armed Antifa people making sure, I guess, hoping the right-wing people weren't going to get out of control, although the right-wing people just brought signs or whatever and protested, which is also protected behavior. But yeah, I know that some Antifa groups are not really down with gun control in the same way that the Democrats are.
Many factions of the left that strongly support, and in fact, especially
they need guns. How are they going to overthrow the capitalist patriarchy or whatever?
Be armed. I've been having conversations with friends for a long time about going to a gun range and learning how to shoot because the world demands it. Would I prefer to live in a world where it wasn't as easy to access guns and it wasn't as likely to be a victim of gun violence? Of course. But I also think that if this is the world that conservatives and a lot of people want to have, then you can't exactly complain when the left responds in kind. It seems very hypocritical to me of Lauren Boebert to be upset about some people taking advantage of the right that she fights for.
I don't know if she was saying she was upset about it. I think she was trying to call out the hypocrisy of liberals who don't.
Wait, Antifa is a group that has very consistently been pro this the whole time. So what exactly is the hypocrisy? There's none. We talk a lot about this show about how liberals apparently are so ignorant about what conservatives are all about. It seems to me that the average conservative doesn't know the difference between a leftist, a liberal, a Democrat, and Antifa.
That's
and if
fair,
you think that Antifa is some Democratic Party mascot, then it shows a lot of ignorance on your part.
That's fair. And I celebrate responsible gun ownership, responsible self-defense, which is what the group did here. There wasn't a scuffle. The other group, held back and did their little protest, and the Antifa people defended the establishment, and that is exactly why I support responsible gun ownership and responsible self-defense with guns. That can be a perfectly legitimate exercising of your rights, and I'm happy to see that happen there. So
it's a win for all. Fun, good times. Lots of food.
I mean, this whole issue is getting a little more than a little ridiculous. The threat of, I just don't understand. Just why do you care? Like, let other parents already face so much pressure to parent their kids exactly correctly, and to involve the Republicans seeming to suggest that they want to involve the state to, and I just keep trying to remind Republicans, the state is not ultimately going to be an arbiter of the kind of family values that you want to see practice. If you want, you should practice those values in your family and preach those values in your church and all of those things. But if you think you're going to have some child services-esque investigation that ends up correctly enforcing your moral vision, that is going to go so wrong, so badly. In fact, could be used against conservative families for being excessively conservative, which is something law enforcement has a long history. If you want to go into
unsafe keeping of guns in the home, any number of things that people could have.
The government hassles people and harasses people, and just like, if you don't approve of this, it's totally fine. I think some of the videos I've seen from some of these events were a little like, I don't know. But again, it's not my business.
Right, but we also threw up images from Florida that no one was complaining about of kids sitting at Hooters, which is a restaurant, which is explicitly about showing off the female body as they serve you chicken wings, which is completely fine. But there is, look, in a lot of these moral panics, it becomes very clear when you look at very similar situations that it's not about the underlying thing. You know, people are very concerned about the idea that underage folks who are trans and wanting to transition would undergo a surgery that was irreparable, and that is very, a big surgery, not a small thing. And I understand that as a parent. Me personally, I would have concerns, should my kid get a tattoo young? Should they get a rhinoplasty young? These are all things that I would encourage people to wait as long as possible for them to do, because they are expensive, they are painful, there is some medical risk associated with it, regardless of how I feel about any particular issue or the issue of transition in and of itself. But a lot of the people who are very, very upset about the idea of someone who is 17-year-old, let's say, having transition surgery, don't bring that same kind of energy to other kind of surgeries, like the thousands and thousands of girls who get rhinoplasties.
It's because they just object to the surgery. The same thing as you made the Hooters. It's just they don't object to that because they don't object to provocative female. They do object to men dressing up as women and dancing.
And they use provocative language like chop off the breasts of women, and it's like, okay, or you could say it's a mastectomy. I think that is significant enough. Mastectomies are serious. Or tops, or whatever you want to call it, that's serious enough. But you can tell by the way that they reframe the language that they actually have to gin up a little bit more controversy than I could call a circumcision lopping off a piece of the male anatomy.
Although there are a lot of people who object on the grounds that that babies cannot consent to have that done.
Andrew Yang is one of them, and not that I'm having anybody's child, but I would very much. I'm not inclined towards circumcision myself.
I don't know how I feel about it.
People. You have to acknowledge that people have very different energy levels. And there's a very different valence to the conversation when we're talking about one kind of mutilation versus another. Even when we're talking about female genital mutilation versus male genital mutilation, because of the cultural implications here. So let's just talk about the cultural factors and be honest about it instead of pretending it's about the medical decision itself.
Yeah, our friend Kim Iverson got kicked off a real hornet's nest on Twitter last night, arguing with Matt Walsh and Lauren Chen and some other conservative figures on exactly this question. And the point she was making is exactly what I said about this issue. I agree with her totally. On Monday, when Boccia and I discussed it, is that I just don't understand how you could say if in some states 16-year-olds can consent to sex, they can consent to get married, they can do all sorts of things. I can't understand the argument for why you wouldn't be able to then consent to have some kind of surgery. Now maybe it should be 18, but it should be the same thing. If you can consent, if you can get married, have sex, have children, but you can't consent to have surgery, that doesn't make any sense to me.
I think in most of these cases, it's like parental consent is being required here, and the parents are the ones that are paying for a lot of these surgeries. Yeah. And so people are really upset about the parents and their parenting decision, which again, there are a whole host of parenting decisions that I promise you I would have an issue with if I were to weigh in on other people's lives, but I simply choose not to.
The policy, so the policy question only comes in if it's like a kid wants this, a doctor's willing to do it, parents don't want it. Although I think most doctors in the sphere will not do it if the parents don't want to do it.
Yeah, and not just
to a certain age. And in that, then it does come in, like if your parents don't.
But because there's a bunch of social support that people need, they want to make sure that they're getting the right psychological support, that they have a place to recover. There's a whole host of factors that goes into people making these decisions and doctors recommending these. And so it really is. I'm not saying that every case is cut and dry. But the fact is that most of the people talking about this and weighing in very heavily with their opinions, it's not their children, and they're not particularly well informed. And it is frustrating that conservatives who really understand the dangers of government overreach in the family life in certain instances throw all of that caution to the wind when it's something like transition surgery or abortion rights.
That said, they did have that, again, we talked about this on Monday, you weren't here, this sort of libs of TikTok investigation, and they did get, for this one hospital that's been really targeted by conservatives, they put out a statement saying we never do this on anyone younger than, I think it was 17.
The Boston Children's Hospital,
yeah, right, or maybe this was the National Children's Hospital.
Oh, okay.
They put out the statement saying, yeah, we never do this on anyone younger than 17, I think. And libs of TikTok called saying, I have a 16-year-old, and she got two people who are telephone operators working at that hospital say, yes, we would. Really heavily suggesting, we would do it for your kid and for kids much younger.
Well, which do what? Because this is a process that, again, takes such a long time that I wouldn't be surprised if most people who get started with these psychological evaluations and the hormone therapies and all of those kinds of things don't start well before.
I certainly think that it's possible that that's what was meant, but the way it was very definitively stated that and heavily implied that they were talking about the surgery itself. Maybe those people were misinformed, or maybe they meant what you are saying. But it's genuinely unclear to me from it seems to dispute, and the way the Washington Post framed it was very like, no, this is debunked because they put out this statement saying that's not true. I'm like, well, but she did talk to two people who suggested something totally contradictory to what the statement says.
People should do some journalism.
Do some journalism, people. All right, we successfully talked about Antifa drag brunch. That was an item on the agenda for the day. We'll have more Rising in just a minute.